Hey everybody, it's Carissa, and this is Bad at Keeping Secrets. And I'm really excited today to introduce you to my friend Suzanne, who I've known in so many capacities over the years. Who I met, she used to be a gallery owner. I don't know if you say used to be,
Yeah.
Interface Gallery, and now you started your own coaching practice. Suzanne, could you tell us a little bit about, I feel like it's in the zeitgeist right now, like maybe for the past year or something like that. Everybody has their own personal coach.
Hmm.
And so today I think we're going to talk a little bit about what coaching is, what you do, and then also talk about our new deck that we put together, collaborated on our first project together, letting your shadow in, what the shadow is, and how we set out to make a mindfulness deck, but actually then how it sort of morphed over what both of us were really interested in. So thank you, Suzanne, so much for coming and talking to me today.
That's great to see you. Thank you for taking the time with me.
So maybe wait, let's start with how you transitioned, sort of how you kind of got into coaching and what coaching is and the name of your practice and how you came up with that.
Sure. Well, I want to pause for a minute first, though, actually, and just say, Carissa, thank you so much for taking this time with me, but really for taking the time to do this project with me. It's been such a dream for me to do something with you. There's like this alignment because we both have the connection from the art world. And now I'm doing the coaching, and a lot of the stuff I'm doing with psychology really overlaps with your interests. And so it was just wonderful for us to come together. And it was so cool to be a part of this process with you. And it was fun. And everybody on your team is so great. And I enjoyed working with Christina from Conveyor Studios. So yeah, just thank you. I love what we created, and I'm really happy to be here.
Me too. So wait, let's talk about this coaching thing. Like, what does it mean to be a coach? And how did you get there from being a gallery director?
Hmm. I don't think I want to take on the question, what does it mean to be a coach, per se, but I can talk about what it means for me
Yeah,
to coaching.
that
And
works.
yeah, just the short journey to coaching, I guess. In a certain way, I guess, working as a curator of a gallery, I was already kind of activating a part of what I love to do, which is to work with people and really understand what their vision is for what they're creating, and then help them to manifest the vision. And that was really the process when I was working with artists at Interface. And that was so much fun. But at the same time, sort of towards the end of that whole project, that was actually really more of a passion project. It was something I was doing on the side while I was teaching art history. And I was really tiring of doing that kind of work. And I was feeling like I wanted something more in my life. And actually, it was right around the time my mom passed away, which when that kind of thing happens in our life, oftentimes it's a time for taking stock and really asking ourselves what matters most. And I kind of went through a period of soul searching and just feeling like the way that I was living my life up until then. I mean, there was a lot that was satisfying, but there was something deeper that was missing and that I really wanted to bring into being. And so the coaching kind of wound up being my answer to that. And it sounds a little corny, but I feel like, really at the heart of it is love. My life purpose is to live a life guided by love in the service of myself and others. And so bringing that into being through supporting people as a life coach and helping people to feel more fulfilled and more engaged in their lives is the way that I'm creating a sense of purpose in my own life.
I think, well, I think it's beautiful and not corny, but I also love corn and cheese and all of those things. But I guess maybe people can think if this relates to them or not. But I think we're all at this sort of like impasse of life evaluation right now, and how to kind of, again, create a meaningful life, a purposeful life. And I think for me, I'm just curious, like, do you have any advice, like general advice for people who are looking to kind of find that transit or make that transition, or sort of find that guiding force or inner principle, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing is, and this is sort of coming from Jungian psychology and thinking about just like healthy adult psychological development, the way that we develop is that in the first part of our adult life, we are still very much like in the process of developing a healthy ego and activating our ego in the world, in terms of how we engage and seek external validation and, manage success and establish ourselves in the world. And then at a certain point, it's actually a natural part of our psychological development. And I think this is something that I really want people to understand, because we can sometimes hit this point where suddenly the things that gave us meaning no longer do. And we're starting to feel stuck and a little bit unfulfilled. And it's like, oh my gosh, what happened? Can kind of feel like the rug has been pulled out from under you. But that's actually a normal stage of psychological development that is calling us in to this like second part of our adulthood, which involves letting go of our ego and becoming more whole and more balanced, so that we can create from a deeper place rather than like from our conditioning, that we can actually create from a deeper place that's more aligned with who we really are. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess, yeah, okay. So you were asking about advice. So I guess it's scary to let go of your ego and the identity maybe that you've associated with, and to look at yourself in an honest way, and to make this kind of change, but to just to understand that it is a natural part of your development and that it's worth it. What awaits on the other side in terms of a kind of freedom and power that you get from really living authentically as your true self is worth it.
Okay, so I have 3 follow-up questions to that.
I know that was a bit of a
one is can we go back to maybe thinking about you as a coach and sort of how you would define the style of coaching? Like you brought up Jungian psychology or Jungian philosophy, and I was wondering if maybe if there are particular types of coaches and what kind of umbrella you would fall under in your practice.
Yes, so I'm certified as a Jungian life coach, and but I also have specializations in success mindset coaching as well as mindfulness coaching. And so in my practice, I'm drawing on Jungian psychology and also like Eastern spirituality, mainly Buddhism, and bringing the two together, which are actually really complementary, and using inquiry processes from both to help people to become more authentic, to become more whole, to welcome parts of ourselves we pushed away. And a big way of doing that with the Jungian psychology is the shadow work. And so that's where, all the inquiry prompts in our shadow deck come from, is that process of self-exploration.
And why do you think people find this so scary or frightening when you worked with people before? Because it's something that I don't know if I necessarily find. For me, it's not quite scary. For me, it's like inviting and exciting. And I'm somehow like drawn to the parts of myself that maybe aren't lovable, because it's interesting and fascinating.
Yeah.
I can't speak for other people, but I think that since you've been working with people, what have you kind of found out what's so scary about this for people?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's interesting and juicy, and it's the stuff. I mean, it's where you have to turn if you want to grow. And the thing is that actually our ego is in place to protect us from doing this. Our ego is the conscious part of our personality. And it is actually built in to protect us. It uses fear as an alarm, and it resists kind of turning towards this kind of work because it would rather us stay in our comfort zone. I mean, you can kind of think of the ego as being risk averse, basically. And so it's like when we were young, we developed a way of surviving, and it's really all about social acceptance with our family and in our society and so forth. And we develop our conscious personality, our persona, our social mask, right? That's the way that we engage in the world. And then we push parts of ourselves, and this is all happening unconsciously, but we push parts of ourselves into the shadow or our unconscious mind that we feel afraid will not be acceptable. And that will, so we go towards what we think will help us survive, and we push away what we think won't. And we develop an identity around that. And that's how we go through most of our life, is with that identity. And on an unconscious level, we are deeply, deeply believing that these things even though we're not doing it consciously, that these things are bad, and it could be things that we need, like, we need access to our anger, for example. But we're afraid of it. And so, yeah, so to answer your question, I think the reason people are afraid is because our ego is actually designed to resist it. And it requires accepting in parts of ourselves. With this, is our deck is called Letting the Shadow In. It involves welcoming in parts of ourself that, you know, in an unconscious way when we were young, we pushed away because we really believed they were a threat to our survival. So yeah, I mean, it's a really built-in reaction. And what I say to that with people when that comes up is it's natural. And that, you know, there's nothing wrong with you. We developed those patterns when we were young to survive. But the problem occurs when we become adults and we want to overcome those limiting patterns so we can create and live from a deeper, fuller place. And in order to do that, we actually have to lean into our fear. When that alarm bell comes up and the fear kicks in, just know that's just the ego. The ego's not bad. It's trying to protect us. But at this point, it's actually limiting us. And so we need to kind of push through that fear and open up to those parts of ourselves that we've, you know, traditionally pushed away.
I think that it's interesting to think about this, like you said in the beginning of this sort of connection with Buddhism and Eastern philosophy and mindfulness. And I was wondering if maybe also as along with exploring it, how does sort of the mindfulness aspect kind of tie into being supportive of doing shadow work?
Well, I mean, I think there's two key qualities that I guess I would highlight. One is authenticity, and the other is compassionate curiosity.
Can you define both of those before we go on?
Yeah. So authenticity for me is about, you know, being willing to experience all of our feelings and own up to all of our feelings, you know, even the ones that we typically find scary. To, you know, take responsibility for our needs, and instead of kind of blaming or expecting others to know what our needs are, taking responsibility for claiming them, setting boundaries and so forth. And also being willing to own up to what you really most deeply long for and go after it, no matter what someone else thinks, or, you know, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So that's authenticity for me, you know, and it's being present to what's really going on in your body. And in the mindfulness sense, it's like being really present to your breath, to your internal sensations, being aware of them, being willing to, you know, be honest with yourself and be honest with others.
Do you think that, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, and maybe you don't think about this a lot, but I feel like there's this like really in this moment, somatic therapy has been really, I don't know, I feel like I read about it all the time. And I was wondering if how Jungian philosophy ties into thinking about where emotions lie in the body, or if they have an opinion on this.
Well, I don't know about if I could comment on that per se, but what I can say is that part of the work with the shadow work is you have to meet it in your body. You have to meet the sensations and the emotions within. And so, like, for example, with our deck, you know, there's a lot of prompts for exploring the shadow and becoming more aware of the parts of ourselves we push away. And hopefully it's going to lead to some insights for people where they, you know, have some aha moments. But it's not enough to just have those aha moments and have those insights. We actually have to also welcome like the discomfort that, so I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but let's say, you know, anger is in your shadow and you realize like how much it's been controlling your life, that you're so afraid of anger and you push it away and you're always trying to be nice and always trying to keep things calm. You have a whole persona around not rocking the boat. And so you need to claim anger and you recognize, oh, I've pushed anger away. There's positive things in anger, like to set it for setting boundaries, for assertiveness. There's a lot of good energy in anger that we need. And so you can realize that. And it's a great insight. But until you've learned to actually meet anger in your body, like to welcome the emotion of anger and the discomfort or the sensations, the shakiness that you might experience when you feel anger, and get comfortable with it, then you're still going to be just as reactive to your anger as you always have been.
Do you think, well, I want to go back to the conscious compassion, or
Yeah,
what was
passionate curiosity.
Yeah. Could you talk about what you mean by that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good moment to talk about that, because of course we judge ourselves for the things that we've pushed away, and that and we think, you know, they can be really scary and really overwhelming. And so having self-compassion and just acknowledging, like in a loving, non-judgmental way, what's coming up. And then curiosity. So bringing like a sense of like, that's interesting. Like you were saying, it can be really interesting. Like, where did that reaction come from? Why do I have this like incredible, trembly, shaky experience in response to that feeling, or in response to something that someone did, right? Whoa, what's here? And so we turn to it like, not like, oh, I'm bad, why did I do that, like in a judgmental way, right? Like, why'd you do that? Like, that sounds mean. But more like, I wonder why I did that. Where did that come from? And just kind of, yeah, so getting curious about yourself, and getting curious about other people too. I wonder why they did that, instead of going straight to judgment of others. Wonder why they did that. What's that
Yeah,
about?
understanding motivation is is really interesting and fascinating, and also how much even in myself I'm blindsided
Yeah,
by what I don't know about myself when you assume that you have access to all of your motivations, but actually um new ones for me come up all the time. um
exactly. Yeah, and so once you kind of like understand how to do this process, it's really just a matter of doing it over and over and over again throughout your whole life, because there's always going to be deeper and deeper layers and residues. It's not like you're just going to get over it. It'll come up again. And you just do the inquiry process again. But one thing I did want to say about the compassionate piece, I know for a lot of people it's hard to turn towards some of those parts of ourselves lovingly. And so one of the things that I always encourage about that is to realize like that these things are like, just kind of like meet it as like a part of like your inner child, to think of it as like, these are survival mechanisms that I developed when I was really young. um and that's, that I like, in order to survive, like, so you can be tender towards your ego, like, you were there to protect me, you were helping me survive. And you can be tender towards that young part of yourself, like, you were just trying to get by, you were just trying to gain love. And so whatever it takes to kind of have that loving, because I know like people can say love yourself, and it's kind of like, but I don't. Like, how am I supposed to do that? So I think one of the ways of doing that is to really kind of like see yourself as a child, and recognize that this all developed when we were very young.
so I think maybe could we take a little bit of time to go through how we structured the deck, and to maybe do some exercises together. I think you said you picked out a few that were your favorite. Where would you like to start, Suzanne?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I feel like we haven't really explained the shadow,
Let's do it.
and we can do that.
Let's do that first. That's great.
I've kind of touched into it a little bit, but I haven't really talked about it. But let me just say first about the deck. So the deck is for exploring this part of ourselves. So the simple explanation of the shadow is that it is the hidden parts of our personality that we pushed away in order to survive. And so we develop our conscious personality, which is our persona. And then we have all the other qualities that are kind of pushed into the shadow. And a lot of people think of the shadow as being like our evil parts, or our, like dark motivations. And of course that's in there. But it's not all that at all. All the shadow actually means, it's not even like your dark side. It means the parts that we can't see. So, the conscious part is the part that's in the light that we're aware of and that we can see. And then the shadow is the unconscious parts that are, that are out of our awareness.
I wanted to ask you, so like in going back to thinking about like these hidden parts or these shadow parts or evil parts,
Yeah.
If you could maybe comment on like why they aren't necessarily, I think we talked a little bit earlier on like anger being a tool to recognize action, but I think the more I think about this, I think this is all inspired by reading this book on nihilism, on like the universe doesn't, there's not a good and bad for the universe.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how these constructs maybe came up historically, or how we learn them to survive?
Yeah. Yeah. So without going too deep into all that, let me just say this. So yeah, I mean, we learn that certain things are good and certain things are bad, and we need that to live in a civilized society. Like, we can't go around murdering each other and robbing each other and things like that. So we have, things in place that help us, kind of guide society, and we need that. But there is so much more in the realm of what is considered good and bad that's sort of not in those extremes. So I think a lot of times when people are doing the shadow work, they want to go to the extremes and talk about the extremes. And, well, what about this? I can't accept that and they bypass like this whole area. There's plenty of an arena of what we could talk about welcoming and exploring that could be healthy and beneficial to us. And I actually think sometimes it's actually what I was talking about earlier with the ego's resistance. I think that's actually a little bit of a defense mechanism to go to the extreme and kind of like want to, intellectualize about that rather than just stay in the realm of some of that just sort of murky terrain that we could actually be focusing on exploring and welcoming. And yeah, so I did use anger as an example before, but I think, another example could be, maybe you were raised to always prioritize other people's needs and to be a caretaker. And, this is true for a lot of women, like, to take care of others and to be kind and so forth. And so you wind up pushing away your own needs. And so prioritizing your needs kind of in your mind becomes associated with being selfish. And so then that's in your shadow. And your persona is all about taking care of people all the time, and taking care of yourself. It feels like selfish. It feels self-centering. It feels wrong and bad. So that could be an example of something where it's like, oh, like in a situation where you're feeling triggered, it's because like you don't have a boundary and you're not, taking care of yourself, and you don't really even know how to. If it requires you to set a boundary, that can like be very triggering and upsetting because that means that you might have to be selfish. So sitting with that and recognizing that and learning how to welcome your discomfort with that is a necessary thing in order to integrate that into your personality so that you can actually have boundaries and actually take care of yourself and learn how to balance taking care of others with taking care of yourself.
Is there so I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about the difference between having a feeling and acting on a feeling, because I think that that's like something that I struggle with. Like, just because I'm feeling a certain way doesn't necessarily mean like I'm going to act on it, or by acknowledging it, it doesn't mean it. I think people are worried that I don't know. I think when I tell people things, it's, we have no control over our feelings and emotions. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between having a feeling and then letting it control you, or letting it go, or acting on it, with the sort of different ways to kind of respond.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think one thing that people often get afraid of when they talk about shadow work and welcoming these feelings in is like, but these feelings are bad. I can't go around being angry all the time or yelling at people and so forth. But the truth is that it's the fact that we don't welcome them and that we push them away causes them we repress them, and they get bottled up. And then we react without our conscious control at all, right? We are in a situation and the next thing you know, you're flying off the handle because you haven't integrated those feelings and figured out how to consciously and help, like express them in a healthy way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like people are afraid that, oh, I'm going to become bad. I'm going to start becoming angry all the time or yelling at people. But actually, by acknowledging your anger, you're integrating it in. And there's actually this great quote that I love. So there's a quote by Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor and a psychoanalyst. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And I'll probably kind of botch the quote, but it's like, between stimulus and response, there's a space. And in that space lies a choice. And in that choice lies our power and our freedom. So basically, what we normally do is we have no space between the stimulus, whatever happens, and our reaction, our response. And the reaction is usually coming from the shadow, right? But when we welcome those feelings and let them in and integrate them, we see them, we're more consciously aware of them. That space opens up where we get to consciously choose. Okay, I feel that I'm angry right now. I can see that I'm having these reactions in my body. I'm aware of what's going on here and what's getting triggered in me. And we can do that self-reflection. Then we have an opportunity to actually choose consciously how we, engage with people. And so our relationships are going to be much healthier and better, and we're going to feel better about, we're probably going to be more likely to get our needs met and that kind of thing.
I think that's fascinating in terms of that space existing being somewhat, in some ways, a potential existence for free will,
Yeah.
and the practice of doing it, to
Yeah.
being mindful and developing that area where you can kind of make the choice on what you really want to do,
Yeah.
with all of your resources available. The so I think maybe let's go through the deck a little bit,
Okay.
Suzanne, and check it
Sure.
out.
Yeah. So, well, one of the things that I pulled from the deck is one of the mindfulness exercises, actually.
Mhm.
And this ties into what we were talking about in terms of meeting the feelings and with your emotions and in the body.
Mhm.
Because, as I said, it's going to be a great start if you do the prompts in this deck, because they're going to like help you get a lot of insight. And I'm sure your followers are already really thoughtful about these kinds of topics and probably already had a lot of insight. But you might wonder, why do I keep having all these great insights? And yet in the moment, it's always the same. I still keep responding and reacting in the same ways. Or maybe I get a little bit of growth, but not a lot. And so I feel like that has a lot to do with meeting the emotions and learning how to welcome them. So the card I pulled is Welcoming Big Emotions. It's a mindfulness activity in the mindfulness part of the deck. And I'm realizing, hopefully people watching this already know about the deck, but we didn't even really explain. But I'll just say that basically the deck has 18 prompts for exploring your shadow side, 18 mindfulness techniques, and then 9 affirmations, and then 9 insight cards that kind of help you understand a little bit more about what the shadow is. And the reason that we balanced the shadow cards, as Krista knows, with the mindfulness cards is because as we've been talking about, sometimes doing this self-exploration brings up things that we haven't wanted to face and that, we've been pushing away. And so it can be stressful. Some of the questions have to do with like family and times when you were young and shame. And so they might be a little destabilizing. And so the idea is that the mindfulness cards are then there to help ground you in the present moment, to recognize that you're safe, and to stabilize your nervous system. So, anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, but this card, Welcoming Big Emotions, is basically the card that you could do again and again after every shadow prompt, after every time you feel triggered, as a way of not just having insight, but helping figure out how to meet it. And so it's an invitation into like a little bit of a like quiet meditation. And it says, find a comfortable place to sit, close your eyes and take a few deep breaths, and think of a strong feeling you usually try not to feel. And instead of pushing it away, welcome it. Imagine making space for it. And for this part, sometimes I literally imagine my boundaries of my body softening and my whole body expanding to just kind of give some room to that feeling that I don't normally allow myself to feel. And then it says, you could say something gentle like, it's okay for you to be here. And then finally it says, as you breathe, imagine a warm energy emanating from your heart and surrounding the feeling. And then just stay with it for a few minutes of just breathing and being together.
I love these. It's so hard too, because there's like I'm also at this moment reading this book about the commodification of self-care. And I think about this, I've been thinking a lot about like, okay, so what do these function like? It's a privilege to be able to talk to you and to have you as a coach. And then it's also a privilege to have the time to go through these. But what would you say to people who maybe can't get the deck or don't have time in this weird sort of capitalist moment that we have that everything seems a bit restrictive? What do you think that like what can people do without the deck for like letting their shadow in? Do you have recommendations? Sorry, that's kind of a curveball.
No, that's okay. I think that it's true for anyone, no matter who you are, that this is work that you can do again and again on your own, anywhere that you are. And I think that whatever your financial circumstances are, whatever your external circumstances are, part of this work is actually recognizing that it's about becoming like a mature adult in a psychological sense, where we're no longer at the whim of our external conditions, where, we're trying to please everybody outside of ourselves, and we're blaming our external environment for what we have and for how things are. It's like claiming a power to actually be the creator of your own life, and to to exercise your own creative capacities regardless of the external conditions. And the tools are really simple, and you can do them anywhere. Anytime you're feeling triggered, or you notice that you're in a strong judgment where you're projecting a bunch of feelings onto other people, get curious, bring that compassionate curiosity, ask yourself, where did that come from? What's going on inside my body? Let me just sit here for a minute and like welcome those feelings, and take some time and be present with them. Let me bring some breath in. Breath is free, breath is incredible. It will help soften everything, and it will help create that space where you can more consciously choose. But it does take a commitment. We have to say, like, instead of going from 0 to 60 and just reacting all the time from our unconscious mind, I'm going to choose to actually drop in, bring in my breath, be present to my feelings, and be more aware of what I'm pushing away. And that's what, the inquiry process of shadow work is. It's like, what am I pushing away? How can I become more and more aware of it? In some ways, what's amazing is you don't actually have to do anything about it, because if you just become more and more aware of it, it will naturally affect how you react to things.
So I have two more, because we're almost out of time. I have two more things. I wanted to talk a little bit about what you're offering for people who do feel like they really could use some extra help in terms of coaching and actualizing and manifesting things in their life. And then also was wondering if you would pick one of your favorite insight cards to just close us out at.
I mean, I started with talking about love, and then I feel like sometimes when I'm in these conversations, it can kind of get a little bit didactic, where I'm like trying to explain things, so I think I just want to come back to just like the heart of the work for me is really, and I've talked to you about this phrase before that I love. It's a Buddhist phrase, come home to yourself. And it's on the front page of my website for a reason. It just resonates so deeply with me. It's this idea of like, I want to support people in having a feeling at homeness in themselves, which to me means just being able to be really present, really self-aware, really self-connected, to feel like they're living in alignment with who they really are. And so the work for me is about supporting people in doing that. And part of that is spending time figuring out like what you long for, spending time abiding in your own presence through meditation and mindfulness and so forth. But then another part of it is also seeing where we abandon ourselves. How do we lose ourselves? How do we, get away from our home within ourselves? And the shadow inquiry process is really a big part of that, is seeing how we abandon ourselves, seeing what parts of ourselves we reject and push away. And so it's kind of this combination of like both residing in like who we really are and learning to do that more and more, and learning to identify what that is and what that feels like, but then also learning to identify and see how we abandon ourselves, and then come home, how we get back home to ourselves when that happens. And so it's not, I guess the thing is that this can be applied no matter what someone comes to me working on, whether they're like wanting to change their career or they just want to live more spiritually. It's applicable to anything. And I use these tools in the context of whatever is going on in a person's life. But I think the most beautiful saying that I love, that I would probably want to end on in this regard, comes from Sharon Salzberg. And she says, the healing is in the return. So, we figure out what it's like to be at home in ourselves, and we figure out how we abandon or how we lose ourselves. And then we come back home to ourselves again and again and again. You don't judge yourself for it. You don't hate, criticize yourself, because the healing is actually in the return. Each time we figure out how to come home to ourselves, we're healing that part of ourselves. And so it's actually like, if you lose yourself again, it's like, oh, okay, I lost myself again. That's interesting. You can see where that happened, then come back home to yourself. And every time you're just deepening in your capacity to be present and whole.
Well, I love that. And I think that's a really great ending spot. And I also really appreciate you coming up with a framework to kind of think about the things in our lives that maybe are subconsciously existing that we're trying to put away, and to give us a space of acceptance and love to kind of go through them. And also what you're offering in your practice. When I imagine what it would be like to have a coach that is just there to, I mean, like, not just, but there to help support and guide and nurture. And again, like the title of your business, Diving Deep, to kind of support you in the most loving way possible. And I love how you always assume the best of people and of me. And I think I'm so proud of this deck, and I'm so grateful that you worked on it with me. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Suzanne.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. It's always so wonderful to speak with you. And yeah, I love doing this kind of work. So I look forward to collaborating with you on more things in the future.
So I'm going to put in the newsletter, I'll put the website and the link to you're doing, is it like a 30-minute shadow session?
Yeah, so if people want to sign up and try some shadow work with me, you can go onto my website, and there's a link there to book a free 30-minute shadow session, just as an opportunity to kind of explore this work.
Amazing. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Suzanne.
So,
Have a great rest of your
okay,
day.
Marissa, wonderful to see you.